Now, the things that we're going to be taking a look at in this section are hopefully to make us better at drawing graphs on our calculator. We call these transformations. We need to understand certain basic functions and their graphs. Here's the function x squared, which is a parabola with the vertex at the origin. The function x cubed is similar to x squared, only the left-hand side is twisted down. The function square root of x is like x squared, only sideways, and half of it's missing. The graph of cube root of x is like the graph of x to the third, but sideways. And finally, the graph of absolute value of x is a V-shaped graph with the peak right at the origin. Now, there are three transformations that we want to take a look at, the first of which is called a horizontal shift. If we know what the graph of absolute value of x looks like, if we replace the x with an x plus 3, the plus 3 tells us the graph is shifted to the left 3 units. So it's the same graph, it's just moved over some. Here's the graph of x squared, and notice how this is x minus 4 squared, where the x has been replaced with x minus 4. So we replace the x with x minus 4, shifts the graph 4 units to the right. Here's another example. All of these are things which you can type on your calculator without any issue. If you type x plus 5 raised to the third power, that's going to shift the graph 5 units to the left. Here's the graph of square root of x. Well, the square root of x minus 11, we've replaced the x with an x minus 11. If we know that that shifts the graph 11 units, we would be able to draw the graph of that. Not knowing that, this is what we see. No graph. And that's because the graph is shifted to the right 11 units. We've got to adjust the window so that we can see a proper graph. Here's the ideas that we just showed. If you replace the x with x minus a number, the graph shifts right. Replacing an x with x plus a number, the graph shifts left. This is probably one of the more important ideas about transformations. Well, the same things happens in the vertical direction. The square root of x, if we subtract 4 outside of the square root, notice we're not replacing the x, we're subtracting 4 after the fact. That's going to shift the graph down 4 units. Here's the cube root of x graph. The graph of cube root of x plus 5 is going to be the same graph but shifted up 5. Absolute value of x plus 10 shifts the graph up 10. I will not see that graph on a standard graphing window because my window is not going that high. I have to know where the graph is. And so the summary of what we just said is, if the minus is outside of the function, it shifts it down, and if it's a plus, it shifts it up. Here's a second transformation. These are called reflections. I call them flips. If you change the x to negative x, it flips the graph horizontally. If you change the function to the negative, in other words, the negative on the outside, it shifts the flips the graph vertically, upside down. Here's a graph of x cubed. Notice where the negative occurs. That's outside of the parentheses. That's going to shift it upside down. Here's the negative on the inside, which you notice does the same thing. Shifts it sideways, flips it sideways, but it's the same graph. But this is the summary of what we just said. The final one is the expansions and contractions, or stretching and shrinking. Here's the graph of x squared. If we multiply the x squared by a number like 9, the graph is stretched vertically. If we replace the number inside the parentheses. Replacing an x with 1/4 x, the graph is going to stretch horizontally. Here's the graph of absolute value of x. The 100 tells me it's going to be squeezed or compressed or shrunk in the horizontal direction. On a regular calculator, I wouldn't see a thing because it all looks like the y-axis. And here's a summary of what we just said. Replacing the x with a number times x is going to either stretch it or shrink it, depending upon whether the number is greater than 1 or smaller than 1. And notice how the x's work backwards. It seems like small numbers are to shrink it, but that's just opposite of what happens. The y's work normally. Big numbers make it bigger, smaller numbers make it smaller. Now here's something that I want to take a look at. If I were to type this on my calculator and try to draw a graph, it's likely not going to happen. What do I know about it? Well, I know what the cube root of x graph looks like. However, what do I know is happening to it? Well, the negative is going to flip the graph upside down. The 10 on the front multiplied is going to stretch the graph vertically. And then the plus 20 on the outside is going to shift the whole thing up 20 units. Now again, I would not see that on a normal window. I need to know a little bit about transformations in order to be able to reconstruct graphs similar to this.